So we're going to kick off with this exercise. So I've got 4 things for you to do here. We'll spend maybe 5 minutes on this, but 4 different types of decisions I want you to reflect on. Starting with number 1, how did you decide what you had for breakfast this morning?
It was made for me.
Or how did you decide to eat it and not reject it maybe? But yeah, so how did you decide what you had for breakfast this morning? Number 2, think of the most difficult decision you've had to make ever in your life and how did you approach it? Number 3, what decisions are you currently avoiding and why? Or maybe if you're not avoiding one at the moment, what in the past, what's a decision you've avoided making, you just didn't want to make? And lastly, what's a decision you got wrong? So I'll spend 5 minutes on this. There's no right or wrong. This is just totally your own personal reflection. So the more vulnerable you can be by being honest with these, obviously the more value you get out of self-realization. So 5 minutes. If we don't need 5 minutes, happy to do it in 2, but just write down your responses.
What the most difficult decision is. I'm avoiding answering what I've been avoiding.
Would anyone like another minute, or do we feel like we've got them? Jenny, you're done. Nikki, one more? Okay. Awesome. Well, while the others finish up, is anyone comfortable sharing any of their responses?
Sure, I can do that.
Yeah. Go for it.
And I decide what to have for breakfast. It was prepped the day before. We always do that, soak the yolks. So it's pretty much decided. So meal prep. I think the most difficult decision, I guess, really how do I approach it? It's sort of going back to instinct. How do you feel in your heart, your gut, and also that check-in with values. How does it sit with your values?
Yep.
I've made probably the toughest decisions. What have I been avoiding and why? That's, what really to focus on from a work perspective in terms of what aspects of the business. And that's why is because I believe that's almost customer driven at this stage for me.
Yep.
And what was the last question? Oh, a decision I've got wrong. I'm sure there's bloody thousands of them. Right now, fresh in my mind, a decision I got wrong was failing to return something to the shed and leaving it on the back table for my 9-month-old dog to chew up. This happened yesterday and I was ready to strangle him, but it's my fault because I was lazy and left him on the back table and didn't take him to the shed. There's a few items like that lately, so
yeah.
it will influence my decision making as into what I leave around.
Yeah.
That's better.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, that's really good. Anyone else like to share theirs?
Yeah, I'll share.
Yeah.
So as I said, brekkie was made for me. So I guess I chose to eat it as an act of gratitude. Like I was grateful that someone made me toast and coffee while I was getting ready for work this morning. So
awesome.
Regardless, I ate it. A difficult decision. So for me, introspection. Basically, my question to myself was at 40-something years old, what does the next 40 years look like? So that's been the basis of a few key pivotal personal and business career decisions in the last 18 months. Decision I'm avoiding, I'm a master procrastinator. So I avoid anything that I think will have conflict or potential for conflict. I also try and avoid things where I feel like when I make that decision, it's going to have a major impact. So I can make other decisions really quickly and easily when I kind of know what the expected outcomes are.
Yep.
But, yeah. A decision wrong. So for me, the most expensive decisions I've made wrong is like doing what everyone else is doing what is expected. So for me, it was investing, and then GFC, BAM, you've done all these things. And you know what? The things that I did weren't inherently who I was. It was just what was expected with available money and trying to be smart, do the smart thing. And, I should have just sticked with my gut, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, all that money spent investing on things could have been spent on travel and life. So,
yep.
That's fine.
Awesome. So far with both those responses, there's a lot of things that we'll be talking about today. Anyone else want to share how they make difficult decisions or particularly on that decision they've got wrong?
Yeah, I base mine on facts. So, very much take into consideration all of the facts at hand and then make a decision based on that.
Yeah.
I gotta have the numbers behind everything. I have a whole book of pros and cons for a big decision.
Yep. Pros and cons. Awesome. Jenny, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I think with the difficult ones, I tend to talk to the people who are going to be impacted by my decision.
Yes.
To, get an idea of, how they're feeling about it as well. So I can take that into, consideration.
Yeah.
But I think after I kind of do all that research, I do still tend to listen to my gut in the end, go with what feels right, so to speak. Because certainly when I reflect on any significant wrong decisions I've made, in all of them, I can say I should make that decision. Like I knew that was the wrong decision at that time, but it was either felt pressured to do it or had to do something. You know, there was some kind of pressure, and I didn't listen to that.
Yeah.
The ones I avoided probably when I'm feeling overcommitted and I don't want to let other people down. So then I don't make that commitment.
Yes.
So it's kind of, you know, but yeah, I think trying to talk to people that are impacted. I probably consider how other people are impacted by things more so than myself, and I think that's sometimes a fault, you know, that I don't always do what's best for me. I try to consider everyone else.
Yep. Nikki, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was going to say my breakfast is a routine. It's one of the few routines that I really stand by, so it's easy. I don't have to make a decision about breakfast. One of the toughest decisions for me was putting aside my business to take jobs. It's something that I have continued to do, and I've got to not do that. But my avoiding is I've got to debt collect one of my clients, and I don't want to do it. If anybody else would like to do that for me, that would be great. But the things that I mistake, like the regrets, is when I'm like, fuck it, let's do it, right? And I'm like, let's do it and then work it out later. And usually that actually works really well for me. And the decisions that haven't gone wrong are when I've stopped and not trusted myself, and I've second guessed myself. And every time I've second guessed myself, it's not happened. Or I've listened to, I've gone, I can't do this, and I've listened to somebody else, and like it hasn't gone wrong. So a classic example of this, which my partner brings up every time we go to the Gold Coast, is that I turned down 20 years ago a job, a drive job, like a big job working for one of the big radio stations in the Gold Coast, to go for a smaller job in a shittier town because my friend worked there. Like, for fuck's sakes, like stupid decisions like that.
Yeah.
You know, because I didn't trust my gut. I was listening to other people, and other people going, no, you can't do that. You've got to come and work here, and it's going to be amazing. And it really wasn't. And yeah, it's about listening and then going, no, actually, I know what I'm doing. So yeah.
Awesome. So all of your responses have touched on a lot of things that we'll be talking about today. These 4 different questions here are designed to prompt around the different types of decisions we make or don't make. So what we have for breakfast, often there's a whole category of decisions that we just make on autopilot without even realizing we're making a decision. Like whether it's sock, shoe, or sock, shoe, shoe, like how we get dressed, everything. And that might sound silly to point out, but the reality is there's lots of big decisions we also just do on autopilot without questioning. And it's all a subject of our programming, our past experiences, who's around us at that time. And so sometimes a big part of changing or improving our decision-making ability is to actually start to question every single decision we make. And there's even exercises you can do to deliberately take note of, do I put my sock, shoe, or do I go sock, shoe, shoe, and then changing that. And even changing the hand that you brush your teeth with changes the neural pathways you use and can actually open up different perspectives. So starting with that first one is how do we actually look at the decisions we're making without even realizing, and that we actually have more capacity to make more decisions than we think we do. The second one, they're difficult decisions. That's definitely something we'll be talking about today, like a focus of how do we make tough decisions? How do we make things so that we don't avoid having those hard decisions? And part of that is reflecting on what we need. And what you would have picked up then, some in the group were talking about, I need information. I want all the facts. I want all the data. Whereas for others, it was very much more people. I need to go and see how people will be impacted by this decision. And that actually comes back to our personality behavioral profile, which I'll talk about as well. And then decisions we get wrong. And this is an interesting one because often we reflect on decisions we made and we say it was a bad decision because the outcome was bad. But what I'd encourage you to think about is that doesn't, just because it ended badly doesn't mean the decision was wrong. Because based on the information you had at a particular point, that may have still been the best decision, even though it ended badly. We need to separate decision-making from the activity. So that's something we'll be talking about today as well. So I'm going to share the screen again, and then we'll kick off into the content. Like my usual sessions, there'll be a lot in here. Please do interrupt, like just shout out, interrupt. If you have a perspective on something, just scream it. If you want to disagree, or if you have your own awesome knowledge and experience on something, please share that as well. So one of the things we also need to be conscious of as entrepreneurs in particular is we can very quickly suffer decision fatigue. because we're constantly being called upon to make decisions, and it can lead to the stress of, did I make the right decision? Am I letting people down? Because we always have this trade-off. And this is why people like Mark Zuckerberg, for example, he wears the exact same outfit every single day. He wears a grey t-shirt and jeans every single day because he doesn't want the overhead of having to decide what to wear every day. He's deliberately trying to reduce his decision fatigue, which sounds pretty extreme, and it is. But Trish mentioned meal planning. What she had for breakfast today was because of a choice she made yesterday about meal planning, and using Sunday as a prep day to prepare what you're going to wear every day, what meals you're going to have every day, to go to Coles once and buy once and not do 17 trips to the corner store, all reduces our decision fatigue. And one great little way of thinking of this is, every time you have to think about anything, it's calories that you're consuming in your brain, which could be otherwise used for something way more beneficial. So the more free space you create in your head, the more capacity you have to think about the big picture things. And we all talk about all the time in business, we struggle to get time to be working on the business rather than in it. One way of getting that time is to reduce the number of decisions we have to make. Just reduce your decision fatigue with a bit of really good planning, compartmentalization, using things like a parking lot that we talked about last session. But yeah, be conscious of this decision fatigue. It can manifest where you just feel agitated. You feel like you're sitting in an environment that's too noisy because you've got a busy brain. So how do you reduce the number of decisions you have to make? The other part of why this is important today is, you meet people and their whole life is a should have or could have. They'll tell you about how they had the idea for Facebook before Facebook was launched and they should be a trillionaire by now and all this sort of stuff. The reality is the most successful people in the world have a pattern in common, and that is they decide to do something and they do it. That gap between decision and doing is really short. Whereas for most of us, there's taking a long time to make a decision, then we make the decision, then there's this big gap before the execution. So today, what I'm hoping to share is a lot of techniques to help you just be able to decide, do, and operate really quickly. Now, this slide has a lot on it. This is like a whole talk in itself. But it turns out that humans have patterns. When we avoid doing hard things, there's patterns that we have of those who do hard things versus those that don't, and the self-talk that happens in our head. So, for example, some of the things we'll be talking about today is around fear and the impact of fear on our decision-making. And those who avoid doing hard things tend to avoid fear. They're like, oh, but I could fail. I could look like an idiot. Whereas those that do hard things, it's not that they don't have the fear. They still have the exact same fear that you have. But the difference is when they feel fear, they see fear as an opportunity to grow. They feel the fear and go, like for me, my mantra is, if I feel fear of doing something, my mantra becomes, oh shit, now I have to do it. Because I know that by facing that fear, I'm going to grow and become better and overcome whatever's blocking me. It's like an opportunity. It's like a signal of the path I need to take. So this is something we could talk about in depth. We can definitely talk about it in the future, but the point of this one is to start to be aware of the internal dialogue that you have and noticing the difference in your internal dialogue to other people who are getting different results. Doesn't mean it's right or wrong. I'm just saying notice it, and then you can find out what works for you. And that's why we're going to talk about mindset first. So we'll talk about techniques for decision-making, but it's really important we look at our mindset and how our operating system actually thinks. And obviously, there's a lot of factors that affect decision-making, from, do we know what we're trying to achieve, our objective, to how much information do we have? Is that information accurate? Who's advising us? Are we getting conflicting advice? What's our value systems? Does what we're about to do align with our value systems? Then down to simple things like our mood, emotions, and all of that can be affected by what we just ate or how much sleep we got last night or even how hydrated we are. All of them actually affect our decision-making ability. Have we been consuming alcohol recently? Is there alcohol in our system? That can affect our decision-making. So a ton of influences on decisions, and therefore the question becomes, how do we remove the influences, or how do we become aware of them so that we can actually make the best decision? And so some of the techniques that I'll share in a moment will help you remove these biases, remove these influences. But for me, it all starts with purpose. Like, what are you actually trying to achieve? And if you know what you're trying to achieve, then everything else becomes really easy. And for those of you managing a team, it's important that the team understands collectively what you're trying to achieve. So today, this session is very much focused on decision-making for you. But as you grow and have teams, the question becomes, how do you give a decision-making framework to your teams so that they can make decisions without having to come to you? So there's a founder on the Gold Coast. She set up a new, it's called the Pet Wellness Centres. They're basically a holistic well-being for animal welfare. So it's a veterinary hospital, but it also does acupuncture, like remedial therapy, massage, all sorts of things for your pet. And she has she's given her staff, I think now a team of 16, a framework to make decisions, which is it good for the patient? In other words, is it good for the pet? Number one. Is it good for the customer? Number two. And number three, is it good for business? And if someone on the front desk has to make a decision spontaneously and meets those three criteria, she will back them 100% of the time. So the team can operate without having to come back to her to ask a question. And you can see how that's powerful for a team, but we also need this same framework for ourselves. So if we know what we're trying to achieve and we know the framework for our decision before we face the decision, then it becomes much easier to make a decision. So on this slide, I've got this, will it make the boat go faster? Have I shared this with you before in the time management one? Yes?
Yep.
Okay. So for the new people, this was basically a story of how the men's UK 8 rowing team won gold at the Sydney Olympic Games. And it came down to a decision-making framework question that they asked for everything that they did for 2 years of training. And that was every question, anything they did, they asked this question, which is, will it make the boat go faster? And so, for example, 2 years out before the Sydney Games, when they were reaching for a beer on a Saturday night, they asked the question of themselves, will this make the boat go faster? No, therefore I'm not going to have the beer. And even at the opening ceremony, the entire crew didn't attend. They were the only team not to attend the opening ceremony because it wouldn't make the boat go faster. And there's a whole story. It's an awesome story, and they did win gold. But the point of it is, if you know what your goal, it becomes easier to make a decision. Does this take me towards my goal? Yes. Okay, let's do it. So understanding, having really good clarity on your why is probably step one. So if you don't already have clearly defined goals or purpose statements, make sure you've got them in place. The other part of this is understanding. I mean, a lot of decision making comes down to a yes or no. It's like this binary. Most decisions are pretty binary. Yes, we do it, or no, we don't. And there's lots of reasons why we might feel socially obliged to do something, and we'll talk a lot about how do you know what to say yes to and no to. But there's also this thing called the evolution of yes. So when you're first starting, you almost have to say yes to everything, because you don't know right now what is the most effective use of your time. What is the most effective marketing campaign? What is the best type of customer for you? Right at the start, you have to experiment, and you also have to build credibility. But over time, you have to evolve to get better at saying no. So as you grow your business, as you get more clarity on your market, you have to focus and focus and focus and get much better at saying no. So you need to be on this evolution. And another way of thinking about this, if that doesn't sort of resonate, is, when Obama was president, he couldn't say yes to everyone who wanted a second of his time. But when he was first starting out in his career, he probably took every meeting he could, because you have to build credibility. You have to discover yourself. You have to discover the market. So you need a roadmap for going from yes to no, and you need to understand where you are on it. Now, for those of you who've built up a career and you might have a job and you're right at the top and you have the luxury position of being able to say no to most things that come to you, that resets the moment you jump off a cliff and start a new business. You're back down the evolution of yes, and you've got to say yes to everything. Take every meeting, discover, and slowly learn what to say no to. And obviously a big part of this is fear, and fear can play out in FOMO. It can play out in fear of failure, but it also plays out in fear of success. I'm a massive fan of Mel Robbins. She has a number of audiobooks, podcasts that you can listen to. She's really good at just cutting through our bullshit and saying, no, the reason you've got these behaviors over here is actually because you're still a toddler and you haven't grown up and you're just not willing to put in the effort. That's basically a lot of premise of her work. But this quote from hers, and I know it's long, but the whole point of it is, we lie to ourselves. So often when we're facing a hard decision, we immediately go into justifying, and we can justify it both ways. We can justify why we should eat the donut, and we can equally justify why we shouldn't go to the gym, for example. And we all do this all the time without even realizing we're doing it. We have biases, but it's all bullshit. And we need to develop a system to call out our own bullshit. So as you can see, a lot of what I'm talking about with mindset is how do we remove the biases? How do we remove the emotion? How do we bring it back to what is the actual best decision to get me from where I am to achieve my goal? And here's an example of how this plays out. So if any of you had to jump over a little puddle in the street that was 50 centimeters wide, you'd jump over it without even thinking about it, right? Puddle in the street, you just jump over that little puddle and no issue. But suddenly, if that puddle is a 100-meter cliff fall, the risk has just escalated, but it's the same distance you have to jump. Suddenly we get stuck because we have fear. And the only reason we have fear is because the risk has escalated, even though we still have it within us. We still have the same skill set, the same ability to execute. We still need to get from A to B. Everything else has stayed the same. It's just the risk has increased. Suddenly we doubt ourselves. And so this is why when we have fears, the fear can't be the blocker. We need to have a decision-making framework which removes the fear so that we can actually still make decisions from a point that isn't biased by that, because we still have the capability to jump that little 50-centimeter gap. And we've probably done it 1,000 times in our life and never once fallen into the puddle. But suddenly when the risk is higher, we have that fear. So we need to be able to remove these biases and these perceptions. And one way to do that in terms of mindset is what I mentioned before, is to see everything as an opportunity to grow. So if this clicks for you and you're at a point where this makes sense, this can be a complete game changer. And so I've got here FLEARN, which is learn through failure. So toddlers do this. This is human DNA. This is how we learn. You're starting to learn to walk and you fall down, 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 you fall down. Eventually you're able to stand up for 2 seconds and you fall down. And this is how we learn. We touch the stove to learn, don't touch the stove. But at some point during our schooling system, this is programmed out of us. Suddenly we start marking people only on the outcome. Like you wouldn't sit there and berate your little toddler all day saying, Jesus, you're a shit walker. Look at you. You're terrible. Don't stop trying. Like, why do you do this? But yet that's how we're indoctrinated at school, is right or wrong, instead of rewarding the process of learning. So, but if this clicks and you understand that every time you're afraid of something or there's a chance of failure, you see it as an opportunity to grow, then your mind switches from fear to curiosity. It's like, wow, like I might get 1% better at the end of this. Or, what will I learn about myself in this process? Or if I can jump this little 50-centimeter gap over this 100-meter drop, what will that enable me to do next? So I encourage you to have this attitude of FLEARN, and remember this word, FLEARN. It's how we learn. And a really good example of this, this is a slightly different framing, but Eleanor Kerry, so she's a good friend. She's a dual record holding adventurer. She rode across the Pacific Ocean from LA to Hawaii, 62.5 days in the ocean, 3 hours on the oars, 3 hours off. Amazing story. She was sick for the first 2 weeks, actually had like complete sickness. Her kidneys were failing. They had, I think, 3 serious storms, like tornado type level storms. Anyway, phenomenal story. But the kicker of this is she was backup crew and only had 6 weeks notice before she had to get in the boat and row for 62 days with 2 other girls that she'd never met in her life. And she was not ready. Like, even to the point, it was 3 a.m. in the morning in LA before she got into the boat, and she rang me up and was just bawling and saying, I can't do this. Like, there's a very high chance of death in this particular race. And she honestly believed she'd never see her family again. And she'd never rowed a boat before. Like, even to the point of getting into that boat, she'd never rowed a boat before. She'd never been in the ocean where she'd lost sight of the shore before. And here she was committing to this 4,000-kilometer ocean row. But this is her takeaway, is when we make a decision, we're making the decision from the basis of who we currently are. And we forget that by the time we're even one step into executing on the decision, we're a different person. The very act of deciding makes us someone different. The very act of taking the first step, which is for Eleanor, was going through 6 weeks of training just to be allowed in the boat, made her a different person who could then get in the boat. And she says it wasn't until 2 weeks into the ocean where she was a person who could row in the ocean. So we often make this mistake when we're facing decisions of looking at the decision and what needs to be done and telling ourselves, I can't do that. I'm not that person. But the reality is you don't have to be. You haven't decided to do it yet. Therefore, you don't need to be the person. The only way to become the person who could row the ocean was to go and row the ocean. And Mark Sowerby says a similar thing with swimming across the channel. Like you're not that person yet, so don't put that pressure on yourself that you have to be. And maybe to flip this a different way is, for any of you that aren't musical and don't know how to play the guitar, when you decide that you want to play the guitar, you don't know how to do it yet. That's why you go and get training. And yet with so many decisions, we make it on the basis of, well, we don't know how to do that, so therefore we're going to decide not to do it. Why do we do that with some decisions? And yet other things we know, well, okay, I'm going to learn the guitar, so I want to play the guitar, so therefore I'm going to go learn it. So if you can have that switch of think of it as an opportunity to learn, and think of it, make the realization that you will become a different person at the end of this. So even if the project fails, you're a better person as a result. Therefore, there's zero loss, there's zero risk, because you'll be better. And that's ultimately the best thing for the business. It's the best thing for you. So I know I'm sort of being pedantic on this point, but it is quite powerful. And where this manifests is in our language. So what I encourage you to do is do a bit of a language audit for a day, and like do this as a group, like with whoever's close to you. Ask them to call out anytime you use the word should, would, could, or try. Because anytime you use those words, you've already said you're not going to do it. It's like, oh, I might go to the gym tomorrow, or I'll try and go to the gym 5 times this week, or whatever it is, right? You've immediately given yourself an out. You've already told yourself you're not going to do it. So if you change your language and you're really conscious of your language, you can tell immediately meeting someone how they talk, like, oh, we might be doing this, or we could be doing that, or we would have done this. You immediately know that they haven't made the decision. Because if you've made the decision, you would do it. So be very conscious of your language, because it's a reflection of your mindset. And this one, we talked in one of the sessions on Teams about DISC profiles. So the 4 behavioral profiles within DISC, D-I-C-S. And I know some of you haven't seen this before. But the point on this slide is knowing your behavioral profile, you then know what you need to make a decision. So Jenny, I picked up from what you said before, I think you're an S. I think you're the steadiness personality profile, because what matters to you is the impact on the others. So your part of your process in decision-making is to go and seek the opinion of those that will be impacted by this and see how they feel. And you also made the comment that often you do that at a sacrifice to what you want. So that's a classic S-type behavior. So you can see here on the S-type, what they need to know when making a decision is who will be impacted by this. And they also want to take their time with the decision. They don't want to feel rushed. I think it was Deb who mentioned wanting all the information and data. That's a C-type personality. So if you're the person you go to Coles to grab, a can of tomatoes, and you look at every can on the shelf before making a decision, you're probably a C-type. You want all the data. You want to make the best factually correct decision. So you don't want to be rushed. You need time and you need information. But for a D is much more just like, tell me the target, give me my target and I'm going to go. Does this take me to my target? Bang, I'm on go. So for them, it's like, give me the numbers. Their question is, what needs to be done? Okay, great, now I'll go. And they can move fast because of that. They don't need the details, they'll work it out later. Me, I'm an I. So I's are about, yes, we need the target, but it's like, who else is on this journey with me? Or who can I take on this journey with me? So in that case, I want to know who's involved, not who's impacted, like an S, but who's going to be going. I'm very much future looking. So the point of this is, one thing I would recommend as an action item is to do things like your DISC profile, or to do a Clifton Strengths profile. It's another one. But to really spend some time understanding what you need to make the best decisions. Because for some of you, it will be all the information. For other people, like if you gave all the information to a D, it's like, this is overwhelming. I don't need all that. Just tell me the target, I'll go there. So knowing what you need is really important. So yeah, I'd recommend Clifton Strengths. I'd recommend the DISC profile. There's heaps of others, but those two in terms of decision-making are quite powerful. Which then leads into our first activity. So what we're going to do is actually reflect on, what do we personally need to make a decision? So, and I encourage you to think about a couple of things here. Based on what we've talked about, what do you need? Are you an information person? Are you the goal person? Are you the human impact person? Are you the leadership influence type person? What do you need? Also think about, when do you make your best decisions? So do you make your best decisions when you're away, unplugged from the business for a week and you've got space for clarity? Or do you make the best decisions when the building is on fire, everything's like turned to shit, and you're like the general that comes in and just can see everything clearly? And when do you make bad decisions? So for example, I have a rule. I never make a permanent decision from an emotion when I'm in an emotional place. So if I'm feeling sad, I'll never make a binding decision in that moment, because I know it's coming from the wrong place. It's not going to serve me long term. So for you, think about this activity in 3 parts. Like, what do you need just generically? Number 2, when and where do you make your best decisions or your best thinking? And when and where do you make your worst decisions, where you should just avoid making decisions? So again, we'll just spend 5 minutes on this. Again, there's no right or wrong. This is what you need for you. But actually write it down. What do you need to make the most effective decisions?
So in our business, Aaron?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So I would actually think holistically. So yes, definitely for your business, but also just in life in general, so personal life. I think both are really important. as a couple of you finish up, for those of you that have finished, would anyone like to share their sort of plan of what they need when they're making decisions?
Yeah, I'm happy to go, Aaron.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess holistically for me, I need to just understand the value of the decision for people. So I'm very people driven. I'll often try and have a look at the merit, in terms of impact.
Yep.
That's always usually a big driver for me. Again, I always check back into if it's aligned with my values, and can it make a difference, and who will it help? Tends to generally be my lens that I will put things through. Where I make my best decisions is generally when I give myself space, and whether that's just floating in the pool or separating out of everything. If I get overwhelmed, I'll usually can bring it back to ground by just finding some space and clearing the white noise and getting back to basics. So I've got space and separation. Again, touch back into myself and my values and what I'm actually trying to achieve, and strip away all of the noise, and making sure that I'm informed. So any decision, I'll tend to try and seek out all of those details. I've obviously, because of my background, like I do like to go to stats and I do like to go to figures, but it's a bit side issue for me. Generally, I'll actually kind of go, okay, but what's the impact? Where will it, where will it make a difference? That has always been, those times when I felt, particularly more in a work capacity, where I haven't had the direct influence, and I felt like I've had to make decisions that aren't aligned, and I haven't known all the facts, and I've had to go out and sell something, if you like, to the guys that doesn't sit in my, in my core, and I didn't know enough about it. That's generally when I'll make bad decisions that I'll regret. And again, and I found out more so in the last few months, that not stopping and actually being open to alternatives and different points of view, I guess. I've probably got because I'm quite intuitive, I've probably got a bit of an overconfidence in my decision making, and put a bit too much value in that intuition, whereas I've learnt over the last few months the benefits, I guess, of where we've sat back, even with our approach to the business, and changed what I thought was going to be right, and opened that up to look at it differently, and actually saw on the back end of that was the right decision, and it's had a whole cascading positive effect from that. So being able to recognise now that I can still think and have a strong conviction to my decision, but then giving it space to step back from it and open it up to different perspective, and then reevaluate my decision from there. Doesn't mean I still won't go with it, but just recognising sitting actually outside of it and listening to other perspectives.
That's a good point. So one of the good frameworks for leadership, but also applies to decision making, is to be democratic in decision making. In other words, if you have a team, get the whole team to weigh in on the decision. So you get all these inputs, everyone's perspective on the decision, but then act like a dictator in execution. So democratic in decision making. So you get all the consensus, everyone's involved in the decision, everyone has a sense of buy-in, plus you get all this information. Then the decision gets made, but once the decision's made, that's what we do. Like, it's dictatorship on execution. But I love that part of what you were describing there. That's what it made me think of, was get all that information, the perspectives, everything. Anyone else want to share theirs? What they need, or specifically what they don't need or should avoid during decision making? Jenny?
Yeah, I made some notes, but also just reflecting on, the change over the years and some of the other comments that people made. And just as I've been going through this, Aaron, it's also made me think about it again. I'll read you my answers, but I'll tell you what bugs my head these days. So the information that I need is, I need to know what the negative consequences of the decision might be, and then how I might deal with them. So I've kind of got my safety net. You know, I'm comfortable in my safety net, I guess.
Yep.
I do ask for other people's thoughts, but I feel that, in all honesty, quite often it's more about confirmation of what I've already thought about rather than getting input. So that's something I need to work on.
Yep.
But also about getting information about the impact of the process on others, which I've already flagged. But I guess my guiding light in it is that I have a very strong sense of justice and fairness. You know, so that kind of tends to guide me a lot.
Yes.
I do think that I make my best decisions actually in the shower when I'm not under pressure. Yep. Or, you know, when I've got other people telling me stuff. However, if I'm confident based on past experience, I'll make them a lot quicker on the spot. Yep. You know, or if I feel like the situation that I'm in actually needs some control, then I'm comfortable in making a quick decision to bring everything back under control.
Yep.
I think I make the bad decisions when I actually get too much information and too many opinions, and then I kind of feel like I'm getting torn in different directions. And I think whenever I've made a decision which is probably not what I wanted to do, it's turned out to be a bad decision for me.
Yep.
One of the things that a few years ago, I had done a leadership program, and the feedback that I got from a questionnaire that I did was really quite insightful, but then it messed me up quite a bit in my way I approach decisions.
Right.
And they had said to me that, you know, it's more about your strengths, if they're left unchecked, will be your weaknesses tomorrow.
Yes.
You know, which I still firmly believe in.
Yeah.
But the advice was, at the time, you know, the things that had got me to where I was, you know, which was, you know, being confident in my decisions, making quick decisions, happy to do things on my own, that type of thing. They said then will become a weakness in the next stage of my business, you know, with consulting with others,
yep.
you know, taking time, looking at all the information, getting other input. And I actually then, when I took that on board, I went to the other extreme, and I got to a point where I felt like I couldn't make a decision for myself. You know, I went right the other way, and it really messed me up for quite a while and took away a lot of that confidence and,
look,
you know, control, and it really messed me up.
Yeah. And look, I can understand that. So from what I've heard, even in this session and the little bit I know about you, I can definitely see in the DISC profile that S tendency to your profile, which means exactly what you've articulated, right? Which is you care for the opinion of others and how they'll be impacted, which then explains why if you get too many of those opinions, it becomes too much because you know it's going to impact someone adversely, and suddenly now you're in analysis paralysis. You don't want to impact others. For you, the challenge is you don't want to let other people down. And this is why most S-type personalities become solo founders, because they don't have co-founders, because they might let someone down. I can make decisions faster if I don't need to think about the impact on others. So I'll stay here in isolation and do my thing. And then that becomes a weakness because you then want to avoid having a team where there could be an impact. So I understand all those things. I think for you, maybe it's more about how do you give yourself permission to prioritize you in that decision-making so that you can still have the team, you can still seek their impact, but understand that ultimately the most important part of the business is you. Mm-hmm. And if you're not in alignment with the decisions being made, that's going to have an even bigger impact on everyone else that you're being there for. So, I totally understand. I think you've got good self-awareness of both what you need and how that can impact you adversely. And then I think it's, finding that sweet spot in between.
Still trying to find it.
Yeah. And it's a journey.
Mm.
Mickey, did you have something to add from yours?
Yeah, I just wanted to say my best decisions I make when I'm going on really long drives. But I was coming back to what I made before with the decision making. I found my DISC profile from 2015 and I'm 99% I. It's hilarious. And it's interesting to take it again to see what it'd be now. But my biggest issue is, talking to people, but I've made the wrong choice in who the stakeholders are in taking the advice of people. So it's like you're going to your accountant with your broken arm.
Yes.
that's been my problem, is that I've spoken to the wrong people and made the wrong decisions from that. And so I've like been actively trying to make the right decisions, or talk only to people who, like mentors like yourself, or people who are actually the right people who I need to speak to, because you know, some of the decision makings that I've gone, okay, this is my decision and I'm doing it, this is amazing and it's going to happen, and then somebody who is actually unrelated and unconnected and not a stakeholder goes, that's a stupid idea, and I go, shit, no, you're right, okay, fuck it, I'm out, you know. And that's been a problem of mine. So I'm like, no, working out who are the right people to take information from and acceptance from, and going with that. Yeah. And sometimes those right people go, that's a stupid decision, don't do that. And I go, yeah, gotcha. But you know then that they're right and it's the right thing, and you're not taking information from, the people.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. There's two things you made me think of. One is we often seek the opinion of our family, and we place so much value in our friends and family's opinions. The question becomes, a filter for me of who to take advice from is two things. One is, have they achieved the result that I'm looking to achieve? So are they speaking from a place of experience? And one way to ask that is, would I change places with that person in that particular thing? So you might not change places with them in their whole life, but in terms of that particular thing you're looking for advice on, would you change places with them? That's a nice little metric. Do they have your best interest at heart, or do they have their own interests at heart? But then again, there are some people who are, you know, the world's most amazing basketball coach, but they've never in their life played basketball, because what their talent is unlocking your potential. Mm. So, but yeah, definitely be very careful of who you get advice from. The other thing is, even when you get advice from those people, you still have to put it through the lens of knowing what's right for you. And you will get conflicting advice. And, you know, we all experience mental whiplash, and knowing not just who to listen to, but also to filter it through your own metrics based on what you know is really hard, but ultimately that's a skill to develop. But also, no, this is good. So look, what you will have hopefully uncovered there are some things that you need. And then whenever you're stuck in a decision, you can go back to that and think, okay, I'm feeling like I'm stuck on this decision because I don't have enough information, or I haven't consulted enough opinions, or I don't know what my goal is. What am I really trying to achieve here? When you understand yourself and what you need, then you can fill those gaps. Next, we're going to move on to actual techniques. So we've been sitting here for an hour, and all we've really talked about is some theory around our mindset. Now we're going to get into specifics that you can do. But how are we feeling so far? Is this useful, beneficial, boring, crap? Aaron, please talk about something else. Like, be honest. I'm happy to pivot.
Yeah, this is great, Aaron.
Good. Okay. So I'll share my slides again. We'll move into techniques. Let me just reposition this. Okay. So we've talked about mindset, how to maybe think a bit different or be more aware of how we think. Now let's talk about specific strategies and decisions. And number one, just fucking do it. Like, in most cases, we know what we should be doing. Like, honestly, we do. The problem is our head starts and we make up all these bloody excuses. We start having fear. We start having self-doubt, imposter syndrome, you name it. All of our programming from our childhood and something that our mum said to us when we were 5 years old suddenly impacts us, and we just get lost. So number one, like, just do. More doing, less thinking will always serve you well. And this is because of our gut intuition. And many of you have already mentioned, you know, trusting your gut. And even in that exercise at the start where you talked about decision regret, it was typically those, you regret the decisions where you didn't listen to your gut. And so what you can actually do is train your gut. So Mark Sowerby, who was the first Queensland chief entrepreneur, he actually put this in my head. He shared with me a process of how you train your instinct reaction. And so the advice he gave me was to actually keep a decision log. So anytime you have a decision, actually write down your first gut reaction, the very first reaction you had to it, write it down. And then go about however you make decisions, like using any of these other tools. And afterwards, like, you do the action, whatever, do a review. So I'll talk about this later, but you do a review after implementation and everything, and go back and go, did I make the right decision? And what was my original gut reaction? What was my original gut decision? And what you can start doing is start actually training your gut. It's like, okay, in these types of decisions, high emotion relating to relationship, it turns out my gut reaction is actually pretty terrible. But anything involving finances, in whatever decisions, my gut reaction is actually really good. So you can start training it, and you want to get to the point where your gut instinct is right like 90-95% of the time. Because if you can get to that point, you can just go off intuition. You don't have all the gymnastics, but also you have the confidence to trust your reaction. That's what you're really training for, is your confidence to know, no, I'm sticking with my gut. Like, I think this is a great deal. I really love you, but there's just something in my gut says I have to say no, so I'm going to walk away. When you get to that point, life becomes a lot easier. So train your gut instinct and be very conscious of it, log it, write it down, capture it. So I encourage you, as an action item, start a decision-making log. So keep a little journal, and all it's for is your decisions. And in it, you track the decision, the question or the decision, what your gut intuition is, what you know at the time, and ultimately what your final decision is, and then go back to it afterwards, like review it. Did I make the right decision at the time with the information I had? Even if the outcome ends up terrible, did I make the right decision at the time? I'm not sure if any of you have heard this before from Derek Sivers, but if it's not a hell yes, then it's a no. Now, I know we talked about the evolution of yes at the start. We're not all in this luxury where we can say no to things, but one really good way of checking in is your first reaction to something. Is it a hell yes? Or is it a hell no? And the problem is most of our decisions are in the middle. They're in that spot where it's just like, yeah, like this is sort of good, or yes, I feel obligated to do this. And that's where procrastination comes from, because we don't want to do the bloody thing, even though we said yes to it. Or we like, for me, for example, I love the process of winning a contract, like selling the contract, talking to the customer, understanding their problem, getting the contract, but then I get stuck on the execution. So if I know that, then I can remove that bit from my decision-making and get someone else to do that bit. And we'll talk about that as well. But this from Derek Sivers, it's a nice quote. You could put it up on your wall, for example. If it's not a hell yes, then it's a no. So the way you can catch yourself, if you think of a decision, just the fact that you're thinking about it and stuck is actually an indicator of itself that you don't really want to do it. So when you put it that way, it's like, oh, yeah, actually, if I really wanted to do this, I wouldn't be stuck here debating whether or not I really want to do it. I would just have done it by now. So it's a good little one. It's not the answer to everything, but I do like Derek Sivers' quote. If it's not a hell yes, it's a no, or it should be a no. Mel Robbins, the 5-second rule. I don't know if any of you have heard this. It sort of goes back to the JFDI, just fucking do it. But basically, Mel Robbins talks about this technique. When you're presented with an offer or an opportunity, or you have to make a decision, just count backwards from 5 in your head and actually lean your body forward as if you're falling into, like you're moving forward into the decision, like into your future. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, my decision is blah. And it's another way to get your intuition. Like if I have to make a decision in 5 seconds, what is it? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. So Mel Robbins' technique is really powerful. There's a whole book, The 5-Second Rule. If you want to learn more about that one, definitely have a listen or a read. And the reason that 5 seconds is powerful is because after the 5 seconds, that's when your brain starts painting everything else. That's when fear kicks in. That's when the amygdala takes over, and that part of our brain that, thinks we should stay in the cave and not go outside because there's bears. That's when all that kicks in and we have the self-doubt. Another little technique, and this will sound crazy, but if you have a decision to make, toss a coin. Like just go, okay, that's it. We can't decide. We're going to toss a coin. I don't know if any of you have ever done this, and it comes up heads, and you find out, oh no, I don't want that. Let's toss it again. Like you do actually know what you want. It's just through an action like that. And so, or the other approach to this is get someone else to decide for you. So even if you don't toss a coin where it's arbitrary, say to your mate, what should I do? And when they tell you, all right, you've got to do this, and you have that immediate reaction, no, I don't want to do that, then you've just got clarity. And the reasons these work is because it's removing, remember all those influences over our decision-making? It removes them all. Suddenly it's this arbitrary yes or no. And by being told a yes or no by a coin or by someone else, we get clarity on all our biases that were influencing our decision. We get clarity on, actually, no, I don't want that, or I do. Or I'm so glad you said that because that's what I want to do. So again, you're outsourcing decision-making to a coin toss or another person. Another approach is, instead of thinking of it as a big decision, break it down into smaller decisions. So this is called brick by brick. Mel Robbins talks about this. So for example, if you were thinking about, oh, I want to open a wine bar. It's like, well, that's quite a big thing. Like, should I quit my job and open a whole wine bar? What you can do instead is, well, I'm going to go work in a wine bar one night a week and see what that's like. And I'm just going to make that decision. Do I like it? Do I know enough about it? Can I learn more about it? And then go to the next decision, but break it down. How do you chunk it down into smaller decisions? A classic example of this to explain it better is if you're going for a job. Actually, this might be on the next slide. Yeah, decision gates. So I love this one. I use this a lot. This is one of mine, decision gates. Often we think of a decision as if once we make the decision, we're committed to the next 18 years of our life, right? Most decisions aren't like that. So if you're looking at a job opportunity comes up and you're like, oh, should I apply for this job or not? Like, I'm not sure. It'd mean all these things and then blah, blah, blah. You're already thinking too far down. Like that's step 72. All you have to decide is, do I submit my resume? Because then when you get to the interview, you've got another decision gate. If you get offered an interview, do I go to the interview? That's your decision gate. Yes, you go to the interview. Then at the interview, it's like you get offered a second interview. Do I go to the second? You've always got another decision gate. So sometimes we get lost in analysis paralysis because we've projected our entire future reality based on this one decision. And we can't see it because we're not that, like back to Eleanor's example, we're not that person yet. Eleanor became a different human while she was rowing the boat and by the time she ended. And at every decision gate, we're a different person. So all you need to do is look at, well, what's my next gate? Let's decide, do I want to go to the next gate? Yes? Okay, let's go there. So it's a really good way, even if you're recruiting, like, oh, I'm not sure if we should recruit someone, like do all your analysis. Often we're just afraid that, we can't afford to keep someone on. It's like, well, what if we just put the ad up and see who we get? And then once we do that, let's do some interviews and see if there's someone amazing that will transform our business. And if they're all terrible, all right, we walk away, whatever. But it just frames, it breaks big decisions down to little decisions that are non-binding. Does that all make sense? Yep. Very similar is micro resolutions. So instead of, this is just a reframing, but again, there's a whole book on this. But instead of committing to a big change, how do you make it a small change? So for example, instead of going, I'll use guitar, right? Instead of just saying, I want to be able to play guitar, you switch it to, I'm going to play guitar 10 minutes every day. So if you're looking at you want to do a massive sales campaign and you're going to allocate $100,000 to this sales campaign, like that's quite a big thing. That's daunting. We might get it so wrong. But what if you just committed to, for 30 minutes a day or every morning, you're going to start by sending 5 sales emails? Like it's suddenly it's a smaller thing. You're chunking it down. It feels far less scary. And what you're actually doing is creating acts of micro bravery. So if you do small acts of micro bravery every single day, you'll get more confident and then you'll take bigger leaps. So, when we see the guys and girls that are, in their wingsuits, dropping out of an aircraft and just going on a wingsuit through ravines and all that, they didn't do that day one. There was a process that got them there. And it's the same here, is break it down, set a little micro bravery act, break big decisions down to small daily actions. This comes from Brené Brown. Again, I'm a huge fan of all of Brené Brown's work. She's done a lot of research into vulnerability and courage and leadership. And she has this great little thing she does when she gets asked to do something. So she gets so many speaking gigs or whatever, and she actually pauses. Anytime she gets an offer, she pauses. She takes her wedding ring and just rotates it on her finger. And while she's rotating that wedding ring for 3 seconds, she has this little mantra, which is disappoint rather than regret. Disappoint rather than regret. Disappoint rather than regret. What she means is, I would rather disappoint someone else than live with the regret of saying yes to something I really don't want to do. Which like Jenny, this is what I picked up, I think, from you. We often do things because we want other people to be happy. We don't want them to be impacted. We're nice people. We're not assholes. We want them to be, we don't want them to be impacted by us. We want to say yes, and we want people to like us. Like an I-type personality like me wants the whole world to like me. I'm devastated if someone, doesn't like me. So for me, this sort of thing is like I have to remind myself I should be happier disappointing them than me living with the regret of agreeing to do something I don't want to do. So again, nice little tool. This could be a little mantra you just put up on your desk or practice it like Brene Brown. Again, it's very easy to hear this now and then forget it. So write it down if it resonates for you, if it's something you see yourself falling into that pattern of behavior of saying yes to things to please other people that don't actually serve you. Use this little mantra. Disappoint rather than regret, because you will regret it afterwards. This is another big one that Aussies don't do so well. I think, like in my view, US investors are much better at this than Aussie investors, for example. So people tend to, there's sort of two types of personality. Lots of people, when they're facing a decision, will focus on upside, and lots of people will focus on downside. So pros and cons, right? There's people who are just naturally biased to see the negative, the risk, what they should be afraid of, what the bad things that might happen. And then there's others that are naturally geared towards seeing the positive. Oh, here's all the benefits. What we rarely do, though, is measure the cost of doing nothing. So when you look at risk, we're very good at seeing the risk of taking an action, but when do you ever look at the risk of not taking an action? It's like, so we might look at a decision and go, should I turn left or right? Well, left is going to take us this way. It's going to be less fuel, whatever. Right is going to give us this, but it's rarely the case that we look at, well, what do we lose if we don't take that? Because by not taking something, it might miss the next opportunity, the next opportunity, the next opportunity. And it's not just pros and cons. It's like the con of not taking the pro, if that makes sense. Like it can actually be different. But anyway, measuring the cost of inaction is huge. So one technique you can use is to have a decision tree. What we mean by a decision tree is basically a tree of questions, like yes, no questions, that's you pre-create as your framework for deciding whether or not to do something. So this sounds so bizarre. It's like, Aaron, who the hell would create a decision-making tree, like in this case for having a donut, right? This is a really bad example, but it just helps articulate. It's like you have a question. Okay, let's run it through my decision tree. Should I do this or not? Now, this is for a donut, but where this would be really effective is if you're trading in the stock market. Often trading in the stock market, there's all sorts of emotions that play out and you think, geez, look at Tesla. I really want to get in on Tesla, but it's actually a bad investment, but you've got this emotional bias. But if you have a decision tree that outlines your decision-making, how you should make a decision, then it removes the emotional bias. So you're pre-deciding how you should make a decision so that when you get to the moment of making the decision, you know you're doing it from the right place. So it's like, well, is the share price at this value? What is the underlying asset value? Like if you actually went through the process, it would help you get clarity. So in this case with a donut, do I want a donut? Yes. Do I deserve it? Yes. Are you sure? Like whatever it is, like I know it's a really bad example, but how could you actually create a decision tree for you for decisions that you might face often? And then this also becomes relevant to the team. If you go back to the example I shared from Kathy that has pet wellness centers, it's like decision with a customer. Is this good for the patient? Is this good for the customer? Is this good for the business? So that's your metric. That's their 3 decision-making things in their decision tree. So for you, what is your decision tree? Use this for things that where this is really, I guess, most valuable is in where you have emotional influences in decisions that negatively impact you. So one of the guys I coach, he's a great investor, but these emotional things play out and he ends up making deals, like going into deals that he just should not go into because he breaks his own rules. But if he had his own rules in a tree and goes through and actually ticks them and then sends that, in his case, he actually sends that to someone else. And it's like, so he'll send that to me and I go, yes, I approve because you actually meet all your own criteria. It becomes a filter. So he doesn't screw himself over because of a high emotion day or because greed or ego or whatever it is. So really effective if you have emotional biases that tend to get you unstuck. A similar technique is something called filters. And again, I actually got this from Mark Salby. But lots of people use it. Goggins uses this. But a filter is a decision-making framework of questions that you can ask yourself to remove biases and help you find clarity. So for example, a filter might be, how would I feel if this decision was public on the front page of the Courier Mail? How would I feel if this decision I'm making, my mum knew about this? how would I feel about this decision if my team knew about this or my investor knew about this? But it can also be things like, what decision would I make right now if I had $10 million in the bank? In other words, if I took out financial constraints, what decision would I make? How would I feel if I had all the time in the world to execute on this? What decision would I make if I had an entire team of people who could do this for me? What decision would I make if I had no fear? So whatever it is for you, like look at your weaknesses in terms of, or the things you're afraid of, or what you're lacking, or the things that tend to hold you back, and use them as the filters of questions to ask yourself so that you're removing the bias. You can also do things like in filters, you can even ask yourself, how will my future self feel about this decision? What would the 50-year-old version of me tell me to do in this moment? Because what you were doing is removing current perspectives like time, like financial resources, constraints, whatever your constraints are, put them into filters. Now, filters can also be reminders. So again, I'll just share Mark Salvy's. One of Mark's current filters is it'll be cheaper in 2021. So he's not buying any investments or assets this year because he knows it's cheaper next year. So every time he gets an opportunity come to him, it's rather than leaping in and going, oh, this is amazing, he reminds himself, no, actually, I'm not going to. I'm not investing this year because everything's going to be cheaper next year. That's his filter. So then he knows, right, I'm going to stay focused and stay on target. Can any of you think of any filters that immediately spring to mind for you that would be good filters to run decisions through?
I used to have one which is anything I put on Facebook isn't anything that I would say like on commercial radio on a breakfast, like with like 1 million people listening.
Yes. I think there's a good one there. Like anything you put on email, would I be comfortable with anyone in the world reading? In fact, any message, would I be comfortable with anyone in the world reading this? If not, don't send. Have the conversation instead. Like I think there's a lot in that. Does this concept of filters resonate for anyone? For me, this is quite a big one. I use this a lot now with my decision making.
I need a filter with my brain because my mouth just whatever gets me into so much trouble. So I'm like, oh, that was stupid. So yeah, filters.
And look, the reason they're there as Post-it notes is people actually put these on their mirror in their bathroom, and every morning while they're brushing their teeth, they remind themselves of these filters. Like, what would I do? What would I do differently today if I had unlimited funds in the bank, or if I had an amazing team behind me, or whatever it is, or what can I do today that my 10-year future self will look back on and think is amazing? Yeah, Jenny.
One of mine is don't not do something because it will take too long because time is going to pass anyway.
Yes, it's a good one. I remember my mum signed up for a law degree when she was 60-something, and people were saying to her, well, how old are you going to be when you finish? And she's like, the same age as if I don't do it. Like, you know, why does that matter? It's an arbitrary thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next one is pros and cons. So I can't remember, someone raised this at the start as one of their techniques. This is really effective. Pros and cons. In other words, what are all the advantages and disadvantages of a course of action? So I advise you do this on paper. You actually get a piece of paper, line down the middle, and I actually advise you to break it down. So for me, the way I approach this, a big decision, I'd actually go, okay, for saying yes to this decision, what are the pros and cons of saying yes? And then what are the pros and cons of saying no? And then I go one step further, well, actually 2 steps further. On the con side, I then next to each item actually write, how could I mitigate that con? How could I reduce its impact or make it less likely to happen? And on the pro side, how could I maximize that? How could I get even more out of that? And when you do that exercise, what you realize is a lot of the things that we often write down as the cons, the reason not to do something, we can actually completely obliterate. Like if we just structure the contract differently or structure the deal with the client differently, we can actually remove a whole heap of things we're afraid of. Like, for example, if we ask the new client to put down a 10% deposit, suddenly that changes the entire risk of delivering that project. And all the things I was afraid of are now completely gone. Or hiring that new staff member, instead of looking at it as, oh man, I'm going to put on a new staff member, there's this massive risk. What if you start with a 6-week engagement and then you have a review, or you have certain milestones that they have to meet, and then it becomes the bigger thing. So pros and cons, do it for each side of the decision you're making, and then break down the cons. How could you mitigate against them? How could you remove them, reduce them? And the pros, how could you maximize it? And what I mean by that is, what could we do here to get even more upside? Like all these benefits, how could I get even more benefit out of that? I find for me, this is really effective for big decisions where there's competing interests. So, or I'm just struggling. I can see so many benefits on both sides that I get lost in which one is more beneficial. But the act of writing it out gives me great clarity. So I find this one really useful.
Aaron, that's really helpful for me because I tend to not write pros and cons lists because I might have less pros than cons, but I know that the weight of those pros outweigh the value of those cons. So that just sort of clarifies it a bit how I can justify that, that numbers balance, because it's not just one against one. So that's really useful. Thanks.
Yeah, so something I've done a few times is added 2 extra columns on each side, which is, one is the impact. So let's say there's a con. What is the actual impact of that? So maybe it's a dollar impact or a time impact or a relationship impact, whatever it is. Like, quantify is what I'm saying. So on the con side, actually put a number to it, and then put a probability to it. So a con of this new contract is, I'm gonna have less time with my kids. Okay, well, how much less time? All right, I'm gonna have 5 less hours a week. And what's the likelihood of that happening? 90%. Like suddenly you quantify and you go, oh, that thing that I've got here is a con. It's actually a really remote chance, and it's only like a 10% difference. That's not a big deal. Like I'm okay with that. I can swallow that problem and move on. So you're right, you're absolutely spot on. So you can actually start to quantify it. The act of writing it makes you realize, geez, I'm worried about stuff here that I shouldn't be worried about. Sorry, Jenny, were you going to add something before?
Yeah, I was going to say, Aaron, I also do a weighting on things, so kind of what, sorry, and I can't see who's in the big room talking. They'd said before with weighting it, because if you're only looking at a pro side has 3 items and a con side has 5 items, if you're looking at it that way. But I find some things I'll weight them, like I'll say this is worth 3 cons type of thing, try and give it a priority or a weighting so it has more of an influence in that list.
Yeah. And I think that's really important to reflect on. Like that weighting could be on a couple of different metrics. One is your value system. So if the biggest pro of this is a massive financial win, but the pain of this is doing something that doesn't align with your values and working with someone who's a complete, a-hole, looking at it from the values framework, like let's put my values hat on. You know what? There's other ways to make money. I'm going to say no to this. Because of that, you can put that weighting onto things. So yeah, again, a very common tool, but you can take it. I hope what you took from this is that you can use this in a way to make it really work for you and get clarity on things. Which then leads into this one of how might we? In other words, rather than just looking at a decision, we do the pros and cons, and then we hit this point of, there's a lot of cons here. And rather than just leaving at that point and potentially missing that opportunity, reframe it and say, well, okay, what would this need to look like for us to be able to do it? So rather than just saying no, let's go back and maybe we go back to the client and say, look, we can't do it this way, but if we can do this, then we're a go. And think about this for almost anything, right? Like we tend to rule things out on how we perceive it is going to be, and instead flip it to, well, how might we? And this is really effective when you hit someone that's just a blocker for you, they say no all the time, reframe it and say, well, what would we need to make this look like for you to say yes? And this can be in relationships too, right? Like even in your relationship, you might have a block on something. It's like, well, I know we can't find a middle ground here, but how might we do something? how might we make this weekend work, or whatever it is. So it's a simple tool, but how might we's are really powerful in a team dynamic or with other people involved. But even for yourself, just to re-envisage a contract. How might I make this an even better contract? How might I get over these cons? How might I mitigate all these bad things that could happen? Another important part to decision making, and we talked about this in the team one last week, but seeking diversity of opinion. So we have blind spots. We all do. We all, and the worst case is when we think we really know something. We have the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it turns out we actually don't really know that much. But we all have blind spots, and one of the ways I overcome blind spot is to get diversity of thinking. And this is, I shared in the team one, you know, the stats around the benefits of diversity, but diversity of perspective, you know, seeking out, go and talk to someone who has a completely different opinion to you and ask them. Get the opinions of, like, proactively ask for the opinions of others. What would you do in my situation? What would you do if you were me? Like, they're great framings. Hear it from someone else. What do you think's holding me back? Why do you think I'm stuck on this? But go and seek the opinions. And I've got some examples here now of how to do that. So one is you can do it yourself with this concept of thinking hats. It's like, okay, I'm going to put a hat on. What if I was an investor in my own company? What would I tell myself to do? Or put a thinking hat on. If I was on my board, what would I tell the CEO to do of this business? Or put the thinking hat on, you know, if I was looking at this purely from a perspective of growth or revenue growth or whatever it is, what would I do? But putting like compartmentalizing the part of your reality or getting a different perspective just by putting a virtual hat on your head is really powerful. One way that I do this, and this will sound crazy because everyone I share this with thinks I'm nuts, but I have a virtual boardroom in my head. So I have these conversations in my head, like on my virtual boardroom is Mark Salby. I'm like, what would Salby do in this situation? What would Goggins do in this situation? What would Elon Musk do in this situation? What would Brad Feld do in this situation? What would Albert Einstein? What would Oprah Winfrey do? What would Michelle Obama do? And what it does, basically, my virtual boardroom are people that I respect because of their value system and or what they've achieved. And they have a trait that I don't have or a perspective that I don't have. And by asking that question, I'm immediately challenging my own perspective. Ultimately, it's, of course, bogus because it's all in my head. So I have my own biases of that. So it's not 100% legitimate, but it does help me get clarity. So for you, like, maybe take a moment now, like, who could be on your virtual boardroom in your head? Who are the role models, the people that you admire, the people you respect? They've achieved a result that you want to achieve. And even the little bit you know about them, how could you, like, in a moment, use it as a filter to ask yourself a question? What would they do in my situation? What would they advise me to do? So maybe just we'll spend a minute on it, but just aim to write down 6 names for your virtual boardroom. Does anyone already do this out of interest? Mickey?
Oh, you're on your own there, Aaron.
Kind of, but not to that extent.
No, I did this a couple of weeks ago when I was back at Split Spaces before holidays, and I got one of the boardrooms and I wrote up the whiteboard and people kept walking past. I'm like, it's all good, I'm just having a video conference with myself. I was like, right, okay, this is what we're doing, team. Anyway, it's very crazy.
Yeah.
I probably should shut the door next time, but I will not apologize.
I was in the car on my way home pretty much most days. I talk loud, not from just different perspectives, but try to think from different perspectives on a decision that I have to make.
Yep. That's awesome.
The kids are always saying, "Who are you talking to?"
Look, I mean, with all of these things, it's finding what works for you. So there, you know, there's probably 30 techniques in here in total that we're talking about, and some will work for you, some won't. Some you'll own, like some you might immediately dismiss as, oh my God, Aaron's crazy. But when you practice it, you might find something that works, or you might rule it out and it doesn't. So there's no right or wrong. It's just finding what works for you. But for me, this one, yeah, I actually started this in my childhood. I don't know why, but I just found it really useful. Which then leads into the next way of getting different perspectives and advice and helping work out, decisions, is to actually get real people around you, not just the made up ones in our head, but mentors. So what I mean by a mentor is someone who's speaking from a place of experience. So typically this is someone who's a few steps ahead of you on the journey. They've been there, they've done that before, and they can share their experience. So a mentor typically doesn't say, you should do this. A mentor typically says, here's what I did, and here's how it worked for me and what I learned during the process. That could have been a spectacular failure that they're speaking from. That's a great learn, right? Like, that's a learning experience you should learn from. It doesn't mean they're being successful necessarily in what you're trying to achieve, but they're speaking from a place of experience. So surrounding yourself with mentors, and this is this group in this room too, by the way. Like, each of you are on different points in the journey on all different parts of life and all different parts of business. So getting advice from each other and sharing it as in shared experiences is really powerful. Then you can actually get a real advisory board, again, not just a made up one in your head, but get people around you from the industry. We talked last week around teams, like you could have on your advisory board, a lawyer, an accountant, that sort of thing, but also people from the industry, people who are entrepreneurs, a few stages ahead of you, people who just think different to you. That's the key point here. Get different perspectives. Don't make the mistake of finding people who are just like you, because you don't actually gain anything from that. Make sure it's a group that has different perspectives to you or different experiences. Coaches. So a coach is a little bit different again to a mentor. So a coach is typically a paid engagement. They're there to challenge you on the way you think. A coach may have the experience and may be speaking from a place of experience, but they could also be someone who's just an amazing coach and has never played the game. But they know how to get you out of your own way. They know how to see something in you that you don't see and unlock that. So maybe consider getting a coach for whatever you need it for. The funny thing here is, we all take our car to get serviced all the time, and we all go to the dentist. But how often do we, and we might even have a PT, but how many of us actually have someone there on our psychology, like whether it's counseling, coaching, whatever? It's interesting. One of the guys he's a Brisbane boy. He's the head of engineering at Facebook, so he reports to Zuck, and he comes back and gives these talks, but he sees psychologists because he wants to optimize his mindset and his mental approach to everything he does. So we have this stigma around mental health, but if you frame it as mental performance, like who wouldn't want to understand themselves 1% more than they did before and perform 1% better and better communicate and better lead? So I encourage you to think, I've got coaches on this slide, but think holistically about your mindset. Who's advising you on how to optimize your mindset? Cool. So that's decision-making tools. Just to recap all of that, we talked about starting at intuition, having a decision log. We talked about how do we do things like just decide, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, trusting our gut, measuring it. Then we talked about techniques like, we talked a little bit about how to say no. I'm more than happy to, maybe in the Q&A we could go more into that, because that's often the hardest bit that holds us back, is knowing how to say no to people. We talked about understanding what you need. We talked about pros and cons as a method. We talked about different perspectives, virtual advisory boards, real ones. There's heaps more in the toolkit, but they're the main ones I think are useful. But are we feeling pretty good that we're equipped with different ways of making decisions? Yeah?
Yes.
Cool. Well, now in this last bit, this bit's quite short, but the point of effective decision-making is that it doesn't end when the decision's made. You actually need to take action, and then you need to also measure the effectiveness of your decision-making. So in this section, I'll just talk relatively quickly about executing on decisions. So we mentioned at the start, I actually mentioned this way back at the beginning in terms of our intuition, have a decision log. So keep a logbook of your decisions that you make, the data you had when you made the decision, what influenced the decision, and then review it. Go back and rate your performance on decision making. And this is quite subjective, like what matters to you and all that sort of stuff. But the more you can learn and improve your decision making, the better it will serve you going forward. Track your progress. So one thing, after making a decision, set some metrics. How will you know that this has been a positive or negative decision? How will you know that you're on track to achieving whatever it is you've just decided to achieve? Like what will you measure? Many people are adverse to measuring things. They don't want to be measured. I think it comes back from almost schooling, like we don't want to be tested. But measure things and also define the goals. So you make a decision, you really need to have a time frame then attached to the achievement of that decision. So yes, we've decided to do this. When will we achieve it by? How will we know we've achieved it? And what are we measuring to track our progress to make sure we're heading in the right direction towards achieving it? So that's what we mean by track your progress. Pre-mortem. Have any of you heard of a pre-mortem before? So we know what a post-mortem is, when someone passes away and we go and look at the cause of death. A pre-mortem is where we do that in advance. So we look at, okay, I've made this decision. Now, what are all the ways that we could fail? So what are all the ways that this project, whatever it is I've decided to do, could go wrong? And how do we mitigate against them? So what can we do now to preemptively head off failure? Pre-mortem is really effective. So after you make a decision, do the pre-mortem. Facebook does this, all their projects. Facebook starts a project. The project team sits down and they do a pre-mortem exercise. What are all the ways this project could fail? All right. What are all the ways we could stop that happening? What are all the things we should be measuring that would indicate we are failing? So how will we know if we're starting to fail? Well, we should measure something for that. So pre-mortem is a great little exercise to do. Really good for teams, but you can do it yourself as well. This one, so when we make a decision, it requires a commitment. And so what some people will do is they'll actually write a commitment letter to themselves. I, Aaron James Birkby, have committed to this decision. I will achieve it by then. This is my, and you give a reason why. I'm committed to this because, and you sign it. And then in those moments where you put it somewhere, right? Like in those moments where you just want to give up, it should be there right in front of your face. So if it's a diet related one, it could be a letter you've written, like a commitment to self, and you stick it on your fridge. If it's something about doing sales calls first thing in the morning, maybe you stick it on the dashboard of your car. So it's the first thing you see even on the way to the office or the way to work, or you stick it behind your laptop, whatever it is. Make it your desktop wallpaper on your computer. Make it the screen on the back of your phone. But the point of this one is when we decide to do something 100% of the time, like we are more likely to always do it. Rather than saying, oh, it's okay if I miss a few, it's actually much easier to do it 100% of the time. So Mark Salby, I pick on him because he's a friend and a mentor, but when he decided to swim the English Channel, he hated swimming. The reason he decided to swim the English Channel was to test himself as a CEO to make sure he had the grit, resilience, and the ability to see something through that he could best lead his team that was quite substantial at the time. He wanted to know he was worthy of leading this team. And so he made a commitment to himself, which was, I will train every single day for 2 years. And if I miss a single training session, I will quit as CEO of Blue Sky, which is a massive commitment, right? That was it, because he knew if he missed a single day, he wasn't worthy of leading that business. It sounds extreme, but committing to do something every single day is actually easier in many ways, because when you stop for a day, you break the habit, you break the routine, and then it becomes you have to get yourself back up again to start again. So Yazzie G, some of you would know Yaz. She's the founder of World's Biggest Garage Sale. She's a member of our community, and she sets these random goals, which one of them was to run 10K a day for 100 days. She's actually now at a streak. I think she's run every day for oh no, it's well over 300. I think she's up to like 500 days running every single day. Of course, she doesn't want to do it every day. She hates it, but she's committed to doing it every single day. And if she misses a day, she knows she would struggle that much more to start the next day. So that's what the point of this slide is. Commit to your decision. Once you make a decision, commit to it. This is borrowed from Derek Sivers, who instead of how. So we've made the decision to do something. Now, how are we going to do it? Often as founders, we make the mistake of going and we go do it, right? Especially when it's just us. We're starting the business, it's just us. We've got no money to do anything. It's like, okay, I'm going to teach myself how to set up a Facebook campaign. And then we waste like 2 days learning all this stuff and we don't do it right. And it's terrible and it's half-assed. If you ask yourself, who else could do this? And this is really effective for the things you procrastinate on. So for those of you that you just know your bookkeeping is like outdated, you haven't done it, you're like 4 quarters behind on your BAS, your tax returns, because you just procrastinate, because you hate it. Go find someone who loves that stuff, who like they will do that instead of feeding their kids because they love it that much. And they exist. There are people who love bookkeeping. Like, go find them and get them to do it. You don't have to do all the things. In fact, as an entrepreneur, yes, we have to in the early days, but your job, remember where we started this conversation, the evolution of yes? Your job is to say no to things, like move down that path. Your job is to get others to do things. Who instead of how? Just always ask that question. You made a decision for something to happen. Now, who am I going to get to do this for me? Not how am I going to do this? And that could be a freelancer. It could be an employee. It could be outsourced contract. It could be creating a system to do it for you rather than you doing it repetitively over and over. Even if you do have to do it the first time because you've got no money to do everything, like how do you document it and create a procedure so that it is shorter and quicker for you next time? How do you template the first time you did it so it's quicker next time? How do you write all the documentation even though you're doing it the first 3 times? So as soon as you have money to put $50 on freelancer for someone else to do it, you've got the playbook of how they do it. So just always be asking this question of who instead of how. Eat the frog. We covered this in time management. I think I might skip this one here. It's not so much relevant for decision making. But in terms of sticking to your decisions, buddy up. Have an accountability buddy. If there's someone else decided to do the same thing as you, or just ask someone to hold you accountable to following through on your decision, really important. Post-action report. So this is when we review at the end. So we've made a decision. Even at the point of making a decision, you could do a little quick post-action report. So what did I just do well while making that decision? What did I do badly? And what will I do differently next time? Very simple. Post-action report, it comes from David Goggins. The military does this all the time after any contact with the enemy or any exercise or anything that they do, there's always a post-action report. I do this all the time. So even after this session today, I hang up from the webinar, I immediately do a post-action report. What went well? What were the bits where people look bored? What would I do differently? The key part of this is there's action items and you have to act them immediately. So after this session, I'll immediately update my slides. I've written notes while I've been going of things that I want to change, make better for next time, because I want to constantly improve my game. So do your post-action report on your decision making. How could I make a better decision next time? And that's it. So I know that last section was rushed, but it was really more, the follow through of decision making.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks, Aaron.
All good. Any, like at this point, Q&A, anything you guys want to chat about, anything in there that you disagree with? And also keen to hear what you'll take away as action items. But any questions first? Or anything you want to add?
I really like the disappoint rather than regret. I know that was a small portion of your whole seminar, but that one really stuck to me. I'm always doing things so I don't disappoint other people, and then I'm stuck doing them.
Yes. Which comes back to the whole art of being able to say no, which is really bloody hard because we're all nice people and we all want people to love us and we're driven by a need for social connection. So a few things on saying no. Definitely starts with that internal framing, disappoint rather than regret. The second part of it is just some language techniques. So say, I love what you're doing. I'd really love to be involved, but right now I'm prioritizing other things. So I just can't do this right now.
Yeah. No, you don't miss an opportunity. That's the only way to say yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess conveying that I'm saying no now, but it doesn't mean no forever. It's you conveying that I'm saying no to this opportunity doesn't mean that I don't like what you're doing. I think what you're doing is amazing. You can also substitute or refer. So say, look, no, I'm going to pass on this opportunity. I'm going to say, no, I don't have the time, whatever it is. Be careful of saying I don't have the time because you're actually choosing. So I'm prioritizing something else. But say, but I'd be happy to help you in this way, or I'd be happy to introduce you to Mary, who might be really interested in this. So you can still deliver value to someone, maybe in a different format or context. But yeah, the art of saying no it's a skill to develop.
I like the bit through the pros and cons, because I had ditched doing pros and cons a long time ago due to waiting and, not it just seemed I would do a pros and cons list and then make a choice regardless of that list anyway. And I guess I internally knew that was because I put different weighting on things.
Yes. I think that's great self-awareness though. Like, I think that's awesome that you, like, there's obviously something there where you've got an intuition, right? Which is great. Like, it's actually, but now it's like finding the way to clarify that, I guess.
Yeah. And then the big takeaway from that for me was what would this need to look like to make it a yes?
Yes.
So instead of just going, okay, well, that's a clear no.
Yeah.
Reevaluating, is there something in that to make it a yes? So for me, that's a good takeaway. So that's a bit more of that bigger thinking and that, different perspective. And I see that as in to make it a yes for me, but also, in conversations and that changing the language that you said earlier about, going back to a client, if they say no, thinking about, well, if they've given me their list of cons, well, what would that need to look like to make it a yes, instead of thinking of solutions that they don't need?
Yes. Yeah, that's really powerful.
So, yeah.
I like to challenge my yeses. So if I have a heap of yeses, I like to see if I can, almost opposite to what you said, I like to see if I can turn them into a negative. And if I can't, then they're a big.
That's good.
But they're a big yes then. If it's, if positive is, the money side of it or whatever, can you turn that into a negative? Could that be a negative in some way? If not, then it is actually positive, a really big one.
I like that. You made me think of something that I use that's not in that slide deck, which is any big decisions, I'll sit on it for 3 months. And if it's still a yes the entire time through that 3 months, then I know, yeah, this is the right thing. Yeah. So, yeah, any big decisions, I think having consistency of a yes, no over time, and giving ourselves permission to take that time with some big decisions as well. Yeah.
I think the challenging part is really important. The way I make big decisions, like in my personal life, is I get my partner to personally challenge me. Like, I'll say, I'm going to do this, something. Tell me what chuck negatives at me, and I do it to him. Like, what if this happens, or what if this happens? And if I've got an answer for it, or if I've got a yes, then I've been challenged.
Yep.
Advocate sort of role.
I like to be challenged on everything, and even with the mentor stuff, even if somebody has done something before and they're giving you advice, you don't take it on board straight away. I challenge everything.
Yeah.
Is that right for me? Is what they're saying right, really?
Yeah.
Which is a good and a bad thing.
I think it's healthy. There's a concept called the red team, which is you appoint someone or a group of people who you task them with challenging you on the decision. Like they have to have the counterpoint. It's like, I've decided this, now I want you to play out the counter argument.
Yeah.
And even when everyone is in consensus, like everyone in the company all agrees, yes, we should all do this. You go, okay, we have a problem. I'm going to appoint a red team. You guys go away and you're going to tell us all the counter and come up with the argument why we shouldn't. Because we do sometimes be challenged against our biases.
It makes you feel negative sometimes, like you're thinking negatively, but really all you're doing is making yourself aware that the negative is there. Yep. Just because it's a negative doesn't mean it is a negative. It just means that you're aware of it.
Yeah. Exactly. Jenny, I think you had something to add.
Yeah, I also try and give myself 3 choices. Instead of, a dichotomous decision, we either do it this way or this way, work out our pros and cons for that. I try and make a 3rd choice so that it's not an either or decision. It's then a more well-rounded way of thinking about it, which is probably a little bit along the lines of what you said before, like how might we? It's kind of almost that hybrid in between the two. So I kind of try and do that. But another comment, when you were talking about your virtual boardroom before, it just reminded me of a good book I read a little while ago called What Would Google Do?
Oh, right. I haven't heard.
And it's actually a really good book, a way of looking at different models and different changes to the market. It just reminded me of that. It was just a different perspective on business strategy.
That's awesome. I like that.
Yeah.
Mickey, you had something?
Oh no, I was just going to say mine is what would MacGyver do? But anyway, right, paperclip and a piece of yarn. No, I was going to say, you know how you mentioned before about doing that reevaluating of what you've done. I was having a chat with somebody the other day, and I'd been feeling like I hadn't been doing anything, and what have you done today? And you're like, I've done nothing. And then when I sat down and had this chat and realized that I'd actually done 100 things during the week and I didn't even realize it, I was like, oh, I've also done this and I've also done this and I've also done this. And so I'm like, now, okay, let's actually do a done list. Like, there's my to-do list and here's my to-done list.
Yes.
Here's actually everything that I did do. And that's been helping a lot with my decisions. It's like, actually, I did a lot and I made a lot of decisions and this is what's good. So, yeah, now writing down what I've done.
That's awesome.
Not just lists, yeah.
I actually found that's a really good advantage that I've found from my advisory board, is that it makes me kind of summarise what I've done over the last 2 weeks or month, depending on when we meet, and it actually does make me feel a lot better about what I've achieved, because you kind of do get so stuck in the day-to-day and you don't realise it, and then to have someone say to you, oh, well, that was a good decision, or well done on getting that finished, it's actually been really good. So, whether it's a formal advisory board or just having someone, like Aaron or, that you check in with on a regular basis is really good for your sense of accomplishment.
Yeah. And it's a natural trait of entrepreneurs. We're always typically always looking forward, like the next, and it's so rare we take that moment to look back. And so where that manifests is we're always in this state of deficit. We're always looking at the gap of where we need to go next, that it can become like we can struggle with our self-confidence or imposter syndrome or whatever, because we're always looking at this gap instead of actually, we just scaled this massive mountain. Yes, there's another peak ahead, but look at what we've done. Like we're actually pretty epic. So I think it's very important.
That was actually my biggest takeaway, Aaron, was the decision gate. Because I have a tendency to go to the end game.
Yeah.
And kind of look at the big picture, and which I think is a good quality, but then I can easily get lost in the journey, I guess, with all of the things in between. So that was a good one for me, just to actually make that decision and get to the next one, because I can pivot, along the way with that. So, yeah, sounds simple enough, but even just the aha moment for me was, just even if I just hone that skill at the moment, and just to get over that hump of being able to make it and move on.
Yeah. I think there's a lot in it, right? Because separating the decision from how to do it, because often as we're making the decision, like say, for example, deciding to buy a house, and it'd be very easy to say, well, we don't have a deposit, therefore we can't buy the house. It's like, well, you don't need the deposit until you decided to buy the house. So make the decision, then work out how to execute on it. So I have this thing I always say all the time with teams. It's like, we're talking about step 72. We haven't even decided if we're on the path. Let's decide, then let's work out the steps and how we're going to achieve it. But it's so hard to compartmentalize those two. And that's, for me, that's why I love decision gates. Like that's really helped me with big decisions. It's like, I don't need to know how I'm going to do that bit over there yet. I'm way back here. I just need to decide, do I want to take the next step? And if I do that, then it'll be the next step. So yeah, decision gates, I love it. I use it all the time.